Nicolle Wallace thought she was running the interview until she cut off John Kennedy mid-sentence, and he answered with a line that froze the entire studio. It wasn't a rally. It wasn't a Senate hearing. It was live national television. And in front of millions, the moment flipped. Wallace tried to finish his thought for him. Kennedy didn't raise his voice. He didn't even move. He just looked up and dropped a sentence that ended the performance and reminded America why some people don't need a microphone to command the room. Like, subscribe, and comment your city, because this one wasn't a debate. It was a lesson. The segment was booked days in advance, billed across MSNBC as a special extended interview. The Chiron promised a rare face-to-face between progressive commentator Nicolle Wallace and Louisiana's straight-talking, controversy-proof Senator John Kennedy. Wallace introduced the segment with a measured tone. Tonight, we're joined by Senator John Kennedy, a man who's never been shy about his opinions and never short on metaphors. A tight smile followed, the kind that says, "I'm ready for a civil disagreement that still lands a few punches." Kennedy, seated in a remote studio in Baton Rouge, offered a nod. Simple, respectful, slightly amused. The lights were bright on both ends. The satellite feed was strong. Producers were ready to keep it tight. Then came Wallace's promise. "Senator, we've got 15 minutes, and I want this to be a balanced conversation. No sound bites, no sandbagging. Let's have a real talk." Kennedy leaned slightly forward. "Ma'am, I came prepared to talk about real people, not real estate in the Beltway." A few staffers off camera chuckled. Wallace smirked, but quickly refocused. She started with economics, a question about post-pandemic job numbers and inflation narratives from both parties. Kennedy responded with characteristic clarity. "We're not short on workers, we're long on incentives not to work." Wallace let that one pass, but only just. She scribbled something in her notes. Then came question 2, immigration, specifically the administration's new processing system along the southern border. "Senator, the administration claims it's efficient and humane. Your party says it's chaotic and criminal. Where do you actually land?" Kennedy's answer was sharp but not inflammatory. "If you've got a welcome mat and no lock on the door, don't be shocked when the house gets full." Now Wallace leaned forward. Her tone sharpened. "But, Senator, that implies lawlessness, and these are legal asylum claims." Kennedy cut in politely. "I didn't say lawless. I said unmanaged. There's a difference." The segment was still civil, but the tempo was shifting. Wallace moved to judicial appointments, a trickier subject. She mentioned Kennedy's votes on a few controversial judges, trying to press him on consistency. "You backed Judge Norcross despite his affiliation with far-right groups. Was that about qualifications or party loyalty?" Kennedy smiled lightly. "I've never asked a judge their favorite flavor of politics. I care whether they know the Constitution and keep their thumb off the scale." Wallace tilted her head. "But that's not how your votes appear to most Americans, Senator." He replied evenly. "If I voted based on public appearances, I'd be in Hollywood, not Washington." That was the third beat. 3 topics, 3 calm rebuttals. Wallace could feel it. The usual friction her interviews generated wasn't sticking. Kennedy wasn't rattled, wasn't escalating. So she escalated for him. She jumped to the next question with zero transition, the kind of pivot designed to catch a guest off guard. "Let's talk January 6th, Senator. You've said you condemn the violent, but you also question the legitimacy of the committee formed to investigate it. How do those things align?" Kennedy didn't flinch. "Easily. I condemn the riot. I don't think that means I have to trust a committee that was stacked before the cards were even dealt." Then Wallace said it. "So you're saying the committee wasn't fair because you didn't like the cards," it revealed. That's when Kennedy tilted his head. Just slightly. The pause hung for half a second. He didn't answer. Not yet, because Wallace had interrupted the rhythm. She'd stepped into his sentence, not to ask, but to assume. The balance she promised at the beginning, it was slipping. The interview was tilting, and Kennedy felt it, and he was about to tip it right back. The interruption lingered like static. Kennedy didn't fire back. Not yet. He let the silence do the heavy lifting. Then, with perfect composure, he adjusted his glasses and offered, Ms. Wallace, that's a clever trick. You interrupted to answer the question for me, then questioned the answer you gave yourself. It landed. Even Wallace blinked, recalibrating. I wasn't answering for you, Senator. Sure felt like it, but let's reset. He motioned lightly toward the camera, a gesture almost theatrical in its calmness. You asked about January 6th. I'll tell you what I've told my constituents. Violence has no place in democracy, and I said that then and now. She nodded slightly. But you questioned the committee's integrity. Yes, ma'am, I did, because process matters. And if you're going to conduct a national investigation, you can't build the jury before you call the crime. Wallace tried again. But don't you think it's hypocritical to condemn the day, but undercut the inquiry? Kennedy let out a small chuckle. Not condescending, but distinctly Southern. You've asked that same question 3 ways in 60 seconds. I'm trying to understand your position. No, you're trying to corner me in a soundbite, and I get it. It's good TV, but I don't speak in sound bites. I speak in sentences. Wallace paused. It wasn't going the way she planned. She shifted topics again, faster this time, a clear sign the previous tactic hadn't landed. Okay, let's move on to voting rights. You oppose the For the People Act. Can you explain why denying expanded voting access is the right thing for democracy? Kennedy didn't even blink. I didn't oppose voting access. I opposed federal overreach. The Constitution gives states the right to run elections. Washington wants to run them like a DMV, 1 line, 50 problems, no ownership. Wallace pounced. But that act would have protected against voter suppression. Ma'am, when I was Secretary of Revenue in Louisiana, I saw what happens when the feds try to manage state processes. They bring a toolbox filled with pliers, but the job calls for a scalpel. Another pause. Kennedy leaned forward. You want to know why I voted no? Because a 900-page bill that uses the phrase election integrity 47 times without defining it, that's not legislation. That's marketing. Now Wallace's tone stiffened. So you're saying protecting elections is just a branding exercise? No, I'm saying passing a law that tells 50 states how to count ballots before they have asked how many counties they have, that's arrogance dressed up as oversight. This time, Wallace didn't interrupt. She tried to steer back to the broader narrative. Let's go back to January 6th just one more time. That's the 4th time you've gone back. The moment hung. Kennedy's voice lowered, not in volume, but in temperature. Ma'am, if you want to replay that day for ratings, you can do that. But if you want to talk about what my state needs, our economy, our people, our future, then I'm here. Silence again, because Wallace had her moment and let it slip. And Kennedy, he was only warming up. By now, the energy in the studio had shifted. Wallace knew she hadn't pinned Kennedy, but she still had one more move. A tactic familiar to primetime interviewers when the subject is too quick, too calm. Roll the tape. She gave the cue to producers. Senator, let's revisit a speech you gave last year on the Senate floor regarding the DOJ and the Hunter Biden investigation. We have the clip cued. The screen split. Kennedy's image moved to the right, and a pre-recorded video played on the left. The audio came in sharp. When Americans see one system for the powerful and another for the rest, trust collapses. That's not oversight, that's hierarchy. Wallace paused it. Strong words, Senator. But isn't it true that days after this statement, you voted against a motion that would have allowed for greater DOJ transparency? Kennedy stared directly at the screen. You play the quote, but not the context. He reached into his jacket and pulled a folded printout. A copy of the speech's transcript, yellow highlighter, covered multiple lines. Here's what you left out. The sentence right after the one you aired. He read it calmly. And I want transparency, but transparency can't come at the cost of weaponized leaks or trial by media. He looked back at Wallace. You aired the fire. You cut the fire extinguisher. Wallace countered quickly. It was a limited clip due to time. No, ma'am. You played the part that made me look angry. You skipped the part that made me look careful. She didn't reply. Kennedy continued, and just so we're clear, that transparency vote you referenced, It included a provision that would have handed DHJ oversight to a task force with no subpoena limits and no due process safeguards. That's not transparency. That's open season. The control room audio cut in for a moment, producers murmuring. Someone muted a channel. Wallace attempted to pivot. Senator, people watching might say you're dodging the core issue, fairness in federal investigations. Kennedy tilted his head. People watching might also say you just edited a quote to make a point that the full statement disproves. Wallace opened her mouth, but he wasn't done. You're not interviewing me. You're hosting a version of me, but the real version isn't shaped by clips. It's shaped by questions I get to finish answering. The line didn't come with anger. It came with finality. Wallace's staff knew it too. She moved her hands slightly toward the desk, signaling to producers to cue the next segment. But they hadn't reached minute 15 yet, and Kennedy still had one more card to play. When the segment began, no one noticed the black leather binder sitting beside Kennedy on the desk. It looked ordinary. No logos, no labels, just a worn spine and brass corners. But Kennedy didn't bring props for decoration. He brought them for timing. After Wallace's clip edit misfired, the temperature in the studio cooled. Not because the tension disappeared, but because Kennedy now controlled the pace. Ms. Wallace, he said almost casually, you mentioned public accountability a few minutes ago. I agree with you. I think Americans ought to know what kind of job we're doing up here. He opened the binder. It was filled with rankings, reports, and printouts from government watchdogs and independent think tanks. Kennedy pulled out one in particular, highlighted and dog-eared. This one's from the Nonpartisan Center for Effective Lawmaking. They ranked every senator in terms of legislative productivity. He held the page up to the camera. I'm ranked 4th out of 100 in bipartisan effectiveness. Wallace blinked. She hadn't expected that stat, and definitely hadn't prepped for it. Senator, I wasn't questioning your productivity. No, ma'am, but you questioned my priorities, and I think it matters that my priorities actually make it into law. He flipped the page. Now here's another one. The Lugar Center's Bipartisan Index measures how often a senator co-sponsors bills from the other side. He tapped the page. Top 10. Wallace adjusted her posture, the kind of physical cue that signals an incoming redirect. She started. But some of your critics say that despite those rankings, your rhetoric often aligns with far-right talking points. But Kennedy wasn't interested in sound bites anymore. He reached into the binder once more. Do you know what my approval rating is in New Orleans, Ms. Wallace? I haven't seen it. 43%. In a city where registered Democrats outnumber Republicans 3-1. He leaned forward slightly. You know why? Why? Because I show up. I don't just talk on cable shows, no offense. I walk into neighborhoods where people don't vote for me and I ask what's broken. Another page. This one was a flyer. A crumpled community meeting announcement from a church in Baton Rouge. Last week, I sat in a folding chair next to a single mom whose gas bill doubled since January. She doesn't care what party I'm in. She wants someone who answers the phone. That wasn't just a point. That was an entire campaign platform packed into 3 sentences. And Wallace? She felt it. She glanced off camera. The universal host signal for how much time do we have left, Kennedy noticed. You can cut the segment early, Ms. Wallace. I'm used to that. But don't cut the truth just because it doesn't fit the template. Then, the moment, Wallace's voice rose just enough. Senator, I'm not cutting the truth. Then let me finish mine. Simple, sharp, final. And just like that, the interview reversed direction. Because Kennedy didn't just dodge the trap, he brought receipts. Literally. When the segment began, no one noticed the black leather binder sitting beside Kennedy on the desk. It looked ordinary. No logos, no labels, just a worn spine and brass corners. But Kennedy didn't bring props for decoration. He brought them for timing. After Wallace's clip edit misfired, the temperature in the studio cooled. Not because the tension disappeared, but because Kennedy now controlled the pace. Ms. Wallace, he said almost casually, you mentioned public accountability a few minutes ago. I agree with you. I think Americans ought to know what kind of job we're doing up here. He opened the binder. It was filled with rankings, reports, and printouts from government watchdogs and independent think tanks. Kennedy pulled out one in particular, highlighted and dog-eared. This one's from the Nonpartisan Center for Effective Lawmaking. They ranked every senator in terms of legislative productivity. He held the page up to the camera. I'm ranked 4th out of 100 in bipartisan effectiveness. Wallace blinked. She hadn't expected that stat, and definitely hadn't prepped for it. Senator, I wasn't questioning your productivity. No, ma'am, but you questioned my priorities. And I think it matters that my priorities actually make it into law. He flipped the page. Now here's another one. The Lugar Center's Bipartisan Index measures how often a senator co-sponsors bills from the other side. He tapped the page. Top 10. Wallace adjusted her posture, the kind of physical cue that signals an incoming redirect. She started. But some of your critics say that despite those rankings, your rhetoric often aligns with far-right talking points. But Kennedy wasn't interested in sound bites anymore. He reached into the binder once more. Do you know what my approval rating is in New Orleans, Ms. Wallace? I haven't seen it. 43% in a city where registered Democrats outnumber Republicans 3-1. He leaned forward slightly. You know why? Why? Because I show up. I don't just talk on cable shows, no offense. I walk into neighborhoods where people don't vote for me and I ask what's broken. Another page. This one was a flyer, a crumpled community meeting announcement from a church in Baton Rouge. Last week I sat in a folding chair next to a single mom whose gas bill doubled since January. She doesn't care what party I'm in. She wants someone who answers the phone. That wasn't just a point. That was an entire campaign platform packed into 3 sentences. And Wallace? She felt it. She glanced off camera. The universal host signal for how much time do we have left? Kennedy noticed. You can cut the segment early, Ms. Wallace. I'm used to that. But don't cut the truth just because it doesn't fit the template. Then the moment. Wallace's voice rose just enough. Senator, I'm not cutting the truth. Then let me finish mine. Simple, sharp, final. And just like that, the interview reversed direction. Because Kennedy didn't just dodge the trap. He brought receipts. Literally. Silence. The kind of silence that doesn't just fall. It lands. Nicolle Wallace sat at her desk, staring into the camera, unsure whether to pivot, reset, or just breathe. In the control room, producers stopped whispering. No audio cues, no rap soon signals, just the unmistakable realization. Kennedy had turned a live studio into a courtroom. And Wallace? She had just rested her case without knowing it. The segment had 5 minutes left, but neither side reached for new topics. Instead, Wallace tried a diplomatic tone. Senator, I think our viewers want respectful debate. That's what I've always tried to foster on this show. Kennedy nodded almost graciously. I believe you, ma'am, but respect starts with listening. Another pause. Wallace nodded once, the kind of reflex you develop when you don't have the next card yet. So she returned to the list, flipping to a final question about judicial temperament, likely meant as a safe landing. You've been outspoken about judicial nominees. Some say your tone discourages qualified candidates from public service. Kennedy smiled faintly. You want the tone. I want the truth. Then he added, I'm not in the business of making folks feel warm and fuzzy. I'm in the business of finding out whether they'll defend the Constitution or rewrite it. Another beat. Then Kennedy slowly set his binder aside and folded his hands. Look, Ms. Wallace, this wasn't a brawl. I don't hate you, but I think you came in with a version of me already built in your rundown. She leaned back slightly, but said nothing. I don't mind being questioned, but if the questions are a trap, then I'd at least like a map. Wallace's lips parted, possibly for a response, but she stopped herself. Because in that second, it wasn't an interview anymore. It was a reckoning. Not personal, not loud, not petty, just precise. Kennedy had turned every topic back to first principles. He hadn't stonewalled, he'd dissected. And now, with only 90 seconds left on the clock, the silence in the control room wasn't dead air. It was respect. Even the text could feel it. Wallace finally closed the show. Her voice was even, but noticeably subdued. Senator John Kennedy, thank you for your time tonight. Always welcome, ma'am. I hope your viewers found something useful. No fake smiles, no overproduced sign-offs, just two public figures, one of whom had brought a highlighter, a binder, and a moment that would be replayed millions of times. The segment ended on time. The credits rolled, the cameras cut, the logo faded. But the moment didn't go anywhere. By the time the clip was uploaded to MSNBC's YouTube channel, producers had made their decision. Trim the binder segment. Cut the "I don't speak in sound bites" line. Ended on the handshake. It was polished, controlled, tidy. But online, the raw version had already gone viral. A staffer in the Kennedy office had clipped the full exchange and tweeted it with a one-line caption. "When you walk into a narrative and leave with the pen." Within 30 minutes, the quote, "If you think my metaphors are the problem, then you haven't read the receipts," was trending on X, Truth Social, Threads, and YouTube Shorts simultaneously. And Wallace? She said nothing, no follow-up post, no tweet, no behind-the-scenes photo with "Good debate tonight" in the caption. Because deep down, in the silent moment between the show ending and the debrief beginning, she knew exactly what Kennedy had done. He hadn't attacked her, he hadn't unraveled, he hadn't owned the host in some cheap viral fashion. He demonstrated the most dangerous thing a politician can bring to television. Preparedness, not outrage, not shock, not theatrics, just a binder full of facts, a memory sharper than a teleprompter, and one sentence that didn't just freeze the conversation, it reframed it. A week later, Wallace hosted another segment on GOP media strategies. Kennedy's name wasn't mentioned, but during a moment of reflection on how candidates massage truth for television, Wallace paused. Then she said it. Sometimes the quietest guests are the most disruptive. And her eyes darted, just for a half second, to the edge of her notes. She never said it aloud. But everyone who'd seen the original segment, they knew. If one sentence changed the balance of a national conversation and made a whole segment rethink its edit, then like this video, subscribe for more stories like this and drop your favorite Kennedy line in the comments.